Yeah. Okay. Let me make you your introduction there, Professor Andreas, until you start, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The Dr. Andreas Kirchhefer, he comes from Dendroarchaeology H.J. Kirchhefer Company from Norway. About his biography, Dr. Andreas Kirchhefer holds a master in geography in Germany and a PhD in biology at UIT in the Arctic University of Norway, Tromsø. He has studied terrains in northern Norway since the early 1990s. In 29, after a couple of postdoc projects at UIT on millennial pine chronology and climate reconstruction, he establishes a one-man dendrochronology company, starting off with dating pine, timber, and northern buildings. He now works on a wider range of tree species and types of wood in most parts of the country, always developing local chronology for timber provenance and dendroclimate studies. Recent highlight has been analysis of Samic cultures, modified trees, medieval fishing traps. She would as well as attempt to explore the quality of historical worth. The theme of this occasion is Dendroarchaeology, Northern Norwegian perspective. So you can start there, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. Do you see my screen? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So my name is Andreas Kirchhefer. I live in northern Norway and have been here for 30 years or more. And I actually started up here studying tree rings in the north as a student already in 91. So here is northern Norway, top of Europe. The southern part of northern Norway is just below the polar circle, which is about here. And so we have this long stretched land up to the Russian border. And the natural setting, of course, is determined by the sea with the North Atlantic current, the warm current, and we have the mountain range. And of course, then the trees are following the northern tree line here. So the outermost islands and the coast is without trees. And that has implications for research opportunities. Already in the mid 20th century, people went north to study climate and tree rings. And so that has developed through the years, and maybe mainly since Fritz Schweingruber did some studies both in northern Norway and northern Finland. And and today we have around 30 main sites of pine and a little bit of spruce down here. So all the yellow dots, that are pine chronologies, Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris. And down here we have Picea abies, Norway spruce, that doesn't grow naturally further north. So the tree rings are quite sensitive to summer temperatures throughout the regions. Maybe there's a slight difference between the coast with a slightly longer summer, July, August, and if you go east of the mountains, the summers are a bit hotter, but maybe also shorter. So it's July temperature that is most important. And then you have sometimes special circumstances and responses within the mountains in the intra-alpine region. Yeah, that can drought also be a secondary factor in some years. For dendroarchaeology, the setting means that we have a quite large region outside the pine forest, so there's no timber directly available from the forest. So you have to go inland and get your trees if you want to build out there. Or you can also collect driftwood, as they also do in Iceland. So that has been used. So here's the situation today with respect to the length of the chronologies. We have a lot of short chronologies, of course, but there are some that are 500 years old. Often, if you go up in the valleys far away from early logging, so you find 500-year-old pine trees, and if you are lucky, you find spots as here in Forfjord. That's one of the millennium chronologies. Sorry. So here I am back to 812 AD, and here in the inland you find deadwood on the forest floor back to AD 320, and then of course subfossils in small lakes, mountain lakes, or forest lakes, back to 600 before Christ. That's a continuous chronology. And then there, of course, are bits and pieces that are older, and they are both radiocarbon dated and dendrodated against the long chronologies of Tornatresk, just on the other side of the mountains here, and Finnish Lapland, where they collected sapphire wood all around the tree line here. So this is a nice framework for also dendroarchaeology, and it's a bit different from situations in maybe other parts of Europe where you build your chronologies with archaeological timber buildings and excavations and so on. So here we already have our chronologies in the forest, and we can use that for direct date. So over the years, I have dated some buildings. Now here are over 70 series on this plot. I have not been working very intensive, but as a one-man enterprise for 15 years, and a bit depending on that customers want dates. That can be museums or private persons or heritage authorities. If you look first at the map, maybe I have done a lot in the Troms County. And now I have a project in the very east, close to Russia. And then you see there's a big gap here. And that's because of the Second World War, where nearly all houses were burnt in this area. And then there's a big gap in the Nordland County, and that's mainly because there was Thomas Bartholin working and dating for the heritage authorities there. So it's a bit about districts where you work. If we look at the timeline, there are a lot of buildings in the 1800s, and if I'm lucky, I find something from the 1700s, but there are not many. In this diagram, there are, so you see one bar for each project, and that can be buildings with a lot of timber or buildings with few samples or just one sample. And sometimes I have two bars for different building phases of the same building. So it's a bit mixture here. Of course, you can divide it in different regions here. You could do that. Well, the dates of the houses are from 1949 up here and all the way back to 1399. And this is, yeah, the medieval stone church of Trondenes near Harstad down here. There are several building phases, but 1399 is the roof construction of the choir here. And then 30 years later, they built the big roof, and 100 years later, they made a little extension here. And right now, there's a process of re-examining the history of the church. So there will be a publication next year, and I have done some additional datings already. They are a bit secret, but it's a continuous building process in this big and the oldest house in building in northern Norway. There's also one little piece here. It's one piece of wood that looks like a plank of a stave church that is reused in part of the church. So it's quite interesting. But mostly we have young buildings in the north. I come back to that. And sometimes I do projects for the University Museum, archaeology projects, and they are a bit scattered. If you start in the east, there are cave constructions here, and also in Tromsø town, and in the middle of Troms County, south there. And there are foundations of boathouses from the 1200s, also in this area around the stone church. And this one looks like a plank of an old building from the 1100s, planks that were half-cut logs that were put straight into the soil. And this was preserved in a farm mound. So maybe it was a sort of monastery or something. That's not excavated, but this one was taken out of the soil when the farmer wanted to dig for some construction there. So and below ground in the Finnmark, there are burial sites, and there's one professor at the university who is very interested in Sami burial customs and history. So he asked me if I could get some ages of these coffins. Quite special working with that. So that's that type of archaeological material we find. Of course, there are always boats if you think dendrochronology, and I am so lucky that there's a large range that's a large time span. There are not many findings, but we have a logboat from 320, and we have a Viking Age boat that probably was a rowing boat from the northern island here, found in the peat, in the bog. And on this occasion, I was trying to collect a wreck close to shore, one of those boats that were used transporting dry fish from the Lofoten Islands and down to Bergen for selling to the Hanseatic merchants in Bergen. So this is 1700s. Preserved here because it's brackish water, so not so much salt in the water, and so the worms in the sea they cannot eat the wood so quickly. So, yeah, special about boats is they are moving, so you have to find out where the wood is come from. And similarly, we have finds of two sledges, one on the ice close to the Swedish border, and the other one close to the tree line, also um, closer to the Swedish border. So the Sami people, especially those reindeer herders, they were traveling between the Swedish side, what's Sweden today, and the Norwegian side coast. And of course, in winter, they were traveling on with sledges, and sometimes yeah, uh, there was a wreckage, and they had to leave a sledge on the glacier, and the others one was just put there in spring when they went down to the forest, and they yeah they didn't use the sledge the next season, and it was lying there and actually disappearing in a little lake, a mire. So it's always exciting getting those findings. Yeah. Then there's a type of dendroarchaeology where you have findings that are at the actual site, and that can be trees with human marks. So here, the Sami people, that's the indigenous people in the north of Scandinavia, they use the pine inner bark for food. And so the peel the bark, and but only on one side of the tree, and the tree can recover and grow around the scar. So you can go and core maybe on the side of the scar to get the transition from the original, well, the wood that was built before the bark was taken, and then the reaction wood to the wounding. And yeah, so there are several ways to get the right dates of these. We are not allowed to cut discs as done for forest fire research, because these are protected by law. So these can be as old as the 1500s and then up to the 1800s. I see a clear connection here between the development of this small scale reindeer herding and use of the pine forest for herding. Yeah. Well, another type, it's not really a cultural modified tree, but it's a tree that was cut in earlier times and left. And this one is cut in the year 69 after Christ, and still preserved. And that's a quite early, very exact date for human activity in the north. Of course, we have all the Stone Age places, but this is probably the first site that is dendrodated from that age. Yes, I miss one picture here, and similar. There are a lot of tar kilns in northern Norway, and the archaeologists of the museum in Tromsø, they excavated one place, and I studied the charcoal and dated the charcoal by dendrochronology. So it's also a very exciting part of those studies. So here's a quick overview of time scales. So if we go here, we have these boat houses from the 1200s. Of course, all the wood is degraded on the outside, so we don't have the exact felling date, but it's medieval or early medieval stuff. And if we go to the boats, there are boat remains from Viking ages, and this log boat from these early times. Funny about this logboat is that it ends exactly the same year when my long chronology in Dividend started. So this was first also dated by radiocarbon, and then later I could correlate it with the Tonetres chronology and then with my growing chronology in Dividend with the subfossil wood. Yeah, and here we have these trees that are cut with axes. They are also quite valuable for developing the long chronologies. That's some extra samples. Yeah, here we have these chronologies deriving from dating scars in living trees, these cultural modified trees, so that I get extra locations on the map with chronologies that also can be used for climate research. Well, I shall give you an example of dating in the north. And this is a quite uh, simple example. It's a little cabin with 2 rooms. It's a corner, um, what's called? Yeah, it's lying logs, solid stuff. And this site is Sami heritage because it's an old marketplace from the 1500s. And this marketplace has been moved from one side of the fjord to the other. And oral tradition says this house is moved from the other side of the fjord around, yeah, in the early 1800s. But we don't have any date. We have old photos, and you see the cabin there. And we have insurance papers from the 1840s. It's there. And yeah, so I had the opportunity to take a lot of course. I took 12 course, and when you come into the cabin, you see all these lying wood and corner timbering. And the first you see are some new logs that replaced wood. And you see also that there has been a larger window. And what puzzles me was that it was much blacker, the old wood in the top here than further down. And I also was puzzled by the X marks on the walls that were quite nice. They show that logs originally were round and then timbered together, and afterwards they were cut to get a flat surface. So that nice X working traces there. What I learned later was that this was a building without chimney, but a fireplace. So you had the smoke here. And with this Finnish tradition, you see here, there are openings, or there had been beams for a second roof construction. And you had beams here, and the warm smoke was led from the other side of the room into this space, and then the warm air should go down on the other side. So we have this changes in color. And yeah, well, later then I saw that all this timber is from the same year. So also the X marks that are very nice down here and a bit more rough up there, it doesn't tell anything about age. Here are the cores, and here I do some internal cross-dating first. That's one way of doing it. And I align all the measuring series according to the last ring. That fits very well. There's some troubles in the middle here. The very tiny ring. I make a mean curve, and here you see the filtered curve for the Bailey-Pilcher, the t-value that is widely used.
Okay, we can.
So it's working. Yes, so here we have just a quick look at the work, the way I work. It's I use the ZAP software, and normally I just do it sample by sample directly, and normally get the the date directly, and then I use Cofetcha to check the dates by cutting the series in 50-year windows or shorter. And I do it with the samples, and I can also do it here with the mean curve of the building against several other regional chronologies. So that's quite basic. Let's see. Here we are. Yeah, I lost something here. Well, here I am so lucky in Skibotn with this little cabin that I developed local chronologies at the tree line here for my PhD studies. So it's only 2 kilometers upslope to the nearest. And Jan Esper has been here for his project, and Fritz Schweinghuber already in the late 70s. So there are some series to compare with very locally. And this gives me a very high t value. Oh, sorry, of 9, and this looks quite nice. So mean curve of the post office, that little cabin, and the Skibotn Valley. So this is straightforward. And here you see the location of the cabin today and the original, or where it's supposed to come from the first marketplace. Yeah, of course, we always go back to the course to check the veiny edge. Here's a little bit of bark. This one was not so nice, but it's still the last ring with a late wood present. So all the samples have late wood of 1774, and so that's the logging date of the timber, and so the house probably is built the winter after, so winter 74, 75. And we can zoom out a little bit and look at the spatial correlations to see if there are other places that are better correlated, just to check if the cabin maybe was transported there in some way. And we see it's close to 9 here. And if we go into the valleys here, there are other buildings that are nearly as good. And so that's these intra-alpine valleys that have a high correlation. The forest sites are the bold ones here. And then I have this dividal chronology with a lot of trees that always is coming up very strong. And that's because the chronology is so strong with a lot of trees and little noise. And so, that's how I work when I want to trace the origin of the timber. If we now go maybe to this island outside the tree line, then we have to turn it around and look where this is fitting best. And if you are out here, maybe you get a good correlation to northern county. If you have a building here, probably the wood is coming from the big forested valley here. What I also see is that buildings often correlate better with each other than with the forest sites. And that, I think, is because I work for climate research at the tree line, and the timber is logged maybe 200 meters downslope and have a slightly different ecology. And of course, the timber is logged where I don't have old chronologies now, old wood in the forest today, and I cannot make long chronologies for comparison. So there can be slight differences, and factors that affect this dendroprovenance. If you look at correlations with the whole of northern Norway, you see that you still have a good correlation to the eastern border, and it's still acceptable to the middle part here, and then it's degrading if you cross the glacier here and the polar circle. So yeah, but it tells you in the north you can correlate across long distances, but there are climate regions that you have to take into account. Yeah, here another old photo from the place as it was 100 years ago. The big merchant here, and then all these small cabins. Well, hurry on. Here we have a slight complicated house. It has local beams in the basement, and then there's a Russian timber in the main part, and then on the top it's again local timber reused from the marketplace, actually. So here I had to do correlations with Russian chronologies from the International Treasury Database. So that works too. Another a bit more complicated little house. If we go inside, or there's old wood in the basement I couldn't date. Then there's a block of timber from the 1770s in the middle, and then they have lifted the roof with one log or two, and then I have timber up here that's not dated, and in the very top it's again older timber from the 1750s. So and this is a house from the outer coast where timber is a very scarce and valuable resource. So you reuse your timber, and so you can have a lot of different dates in your house from here the middle part 1770s, then 1860 nearly on the top here, and then again older. But the date of the logs, the beams of the roof, they probably tell when this house was put up on this place. So 1770s. Yeah, and then the Sami people, they used a lot of broad-leaved wood, like alder. I didn't have a chronology, so I just had to core and look into the wood, and the cross-dating internally looked very nice. But then I had to improvise, and I had some shorter chronologies of pine and alder at the same time, at the same place further east. So I looked at the correlation there between pine and alder, and that looks very nice. So I think I could use the pine chronology for dating alder, and that's because it's a short summer and the trees do nearly the same across species. That's a bit special. Maybe I wouldn't do that in other parts of the world. And so that's for those two sites. Looks nice. And so I came up with a preliminary dating with dates from the 1870s and to the 1880s. And it looks like 2 or 3 building phases here, and that's maybe because this alder wood is decaying from the ground. So the small storage houses, they have to be rebuilt, and you use the upper wood and you put something new on top of it. So it's a circular movement, maybe. And there were more buildings coming up of older. And so I then got this younger building that connected the living older trees with the older buildings. So this is that building in the middle. So now I have a chronology of 200 years of older. That's quite nice. It's probably not possible doing in the forest because the wood is disappearing so quickly. And I did the similar thing with birch, and I had a sort of rescue dendrochronology where a little building was demolished and we just cut all of it, um, bigger logs, and then small logs, small stems that was the roofing under the peat. And I jumped through this. But the important thing is I compared birch with birch in Sweden and pine in my area, and then the alder, and then there was a bit of salix, and it all fitted quite nicely together. So this way I also developed the birch chronology. Special with this house then was I had a lot of samples, so I could tell about the building history. So he started with corner timbering in 1889-90 and continued the work, finished the work in 1892-93. And the spring after, he cut the small birches for the roof and finished the house that summer, I guess, because then he could go in spring 93, he could go in the forest and collect birch bark, put on the roof, and then the peat on top of it. So that's summer work. While this timbering you can do in winter. Yeah, and I actually found a little building of birch that is over 200 years old. It's from the lower timber 1803 and the upper timber from 1804. And that's really remarkable. You won't believe that these birch timbers would last so long. So I think my time is soon running up. I just go quickly through wood utilization. I worked together with traditional craftsmen, and they were interested in the quality of these roof tiles. And we had old tiles from the 1800s and then young ones from the middle of the 20th century. And I measured on those tiles with Q recorder on photos and scans, and then I tried to place these tiles inside the tree trunk while looking at the curvature of the rings, and I've found that the old tiles have been in bigger trees and closer to the middle of the trees, and the younger ones that were damaged and falling off already, that were tiles from smaller trees, and the tiles from the outer wood that's cracking up. Yeah, and we played around with growth models and trying to look of the quality, the ring width, and new tiles here, old tiles there. But when we put that together, we found the growth rates when the trees were young were quite similar. So that's interesting, I think. Yeah. And then we went to the forest to look for those trees. Can we use ordinary trees? This is too small, probably. This is quite big, but much quicker grown, and traditionally use these 500-year-old trees probably at the tree line, singular trees, huge diameter, and you could get out a lot of tiles. And we did the same with these wall planks of a stave church, also trying to reconstruct where came the plank from in the tree, and it was for a practical project for making a copy of the church. And here, of course, the important question is, this is a church from 1170. How was the forest in earlier times? Can we compare what we find in the trees today with the trees we find in the Middle Ages or the Middle Ages? So that's an aspect I like to follow. Lately, last aspect, you can do quite small scale, special temporal reconstructions with tree rings. This is a fishing trap, and lots of small poles of mainly pine and some spruce, and I actually managed to date the spruce, and I had to date against the Swedish chronology, and we found out it was the last time, or the youngest log is from 1343, and this is some years before the Black Death came, and probably the Black Death triggered that this site was abandoned, but it has been in use for at least 150 years before. And if you look at this bit difficult map, you see we have a very old in the middle, relative dates, and then the next phase of dated poles here, and then the next phase of dating poles on that side, and the youngest one in this zone. So we didn't manage to reconstruct how the trap really was organized and how it worked, but we see there's some movement, some changes in the construction. Yeah, I think I have to stop here. Time is up. So the title was Dendroarchaeology, but it was mostly about buildings in the north. And well, I could talk a lot about the cultural modified trees, but that has to be another lecture then. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andreas.
Yeah.
Very interesting, your topic, your discoveries about the medieval data is so interesting. And we will start with question and answer. Please, if there are any questions, feel free to make this, and the doctor is ready to give you a response for you. Okay, Dr. Johannes, please.
Yes, hi. Thanks for nice presentation, Andreas. I was thinking about the alders. It's amazing that you get this good correlation between the alders and the pine trees, and so I guess it must be a strong temperature signal in the alders, something we don't find in the South Sweden. It's a nightmare to work with alders for me. But what kind of environment do they grow in the alders? Is it swamp areas still, or is it drier than in South Norway or Sweden?
I don't think it's directly swamp, but it's close to rivers.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
the lower river
wet.
terrace. Yeah, rather wet, but they also can go a bit upslope with a lot enough running water, surface water maybe. Well, it's about short summers. I think they have a July temperature signal. So,
okay. Yeah.
But I also wonder, how far south I can do this. Can I go to middle Norway, or how far does it work? And of course, I have to go in the forest and I have to go in the forest and do some proper site chronologies and yeah, I think I have some response functions, but I didn't dig them out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Johannes Edvardsson, for your question. Here in the chat, we have a message for the Dr. Andreas saying, thank you so much for your nice
Yeah,
and
thank you.
interesting information, nice presentation about related dendroarchaeology. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor.